Welcome back to Virtual Selling, an educational web series from Sparks IQ. This is our final episode, and it's all about backstage best practices. As you know, backstage selling often involves recording videos of yourself, just like this weatherman is doing for an upcoming broadcast.
Maple, can you stop just for a second? 3, 2, 1. More cold air. 3, 2, 1. Cold air continues across the area tonight. Potential for some frost and freeze for some of us. Warm up, it's going to take frost and freeze for some of us again tonight. The cold air is lingering through much of the week. We'll show you when the best chance of precipitation is with Futurecast. Maple.
Somebody needs obedience training. Somebody needs obedience training. Somebody needs obedience training. Now, to get us started with backstage best practices, let's talk about DSRs, digital sales or digital solution rooms. DSRs are microsites designed for the prospect and then later the customer. Mark, talk to us about the power and importance of a DSR.
The DSR is absolutely a breakthrough in the world of selling. There's no question about this. This has been validated now from across multiple different analyst firms and, more importantly, from across salespeople in multiple different industries. The bottom line is this. All of us have experienced times where we have received multiple attachments on an email. And I'll bet everyone listening has had a time where there was an attachment way down but below the person's signature that they sent, but you never even saw. And so when you think about the buying process, and in some cases there's 4 or 5 different attachments, it can be very hard to consume that information in the form of an email, number one. And number two, in particular, if you're on a mobile device, it makes it even harder to sort of swipe through and understand, wait a minute, is this a PDF or was there a PowerPoint attached? So the DSR is simply the idea that most of us are used to consuming information, and a lot of information, in a web page format. So the DSR is a very easy to create, 2 clicks to create, micro web page that's personalized to a specific buyer or buying group or buying committee. So the idea is that with 2 clicks, I can create a template or I can create from a template a collection of content. Maybe there's 3 pieces of content. Maybe there's 5 pieces of content. Maybe I have the client's logo on this microsite. And then I send them a hyperlink. I just drop that hyperlink right into the email and I say, click the link. And then when they open the link, Jason, they're seeing a short video, in some cases, from the seller. And the seller's introducing them as if they are welcoming the buyer to their home and say, look, I've put this space together for you. I've got the RFP information that you asked. I've got the PowerPoint from our last presentation. And then I've got a 90-second video here, which was a recording from the subject matter expert who joined us for our next call. And then what becomes even more interesting is, as we think about creating presence in your absence, you can be adding things to this same space so that the top level was, here's what we did 2 weeks ago. And then this level is, here's what we did this week. And now following that, here's the agenda for the meeting we're going to have next time. And it becomes almost like a shared space for us to collaborate on a going forward basis.
That's great. Does anybody want to add to that?
You know, buyers are telling us through research, through studies, that they like to research things on their own. And this is a way that we can give them to do that kind of research, to get smart quick, to review the things that they need to feel comfortable with to make a buying decision, and to do it for us in a way that is a branded experience. Sooner or later, it'll take a while, but sooner or later, this is just going to be the way that most organizations sell.
A lot of these kind of behind the scenes activities that buyers go through, trying to capture new information, trying to evaluate different suppliers, trying to understand from communities of users, what are the challenges of using different products or solutions. These are all little buying experiences. They're not the big buying decision that arrives at the end. It's really about how do we guide these buyers through the small experiences, the daily activities that they're embracing. And for them, that may very well be the front stage. They don't think of face-to-face meetings with sellers as necessarily being the primary way that they make their buying decisions or how they gather information. So just because it's backstage for the seller does not mean it's backstage for the buyer.
Following up on that, Mike, how should a salesperson go about utilizing DSRs? Should they just load it up with everything all at once?
The decisions on what content to share and when really ought to be based on the buyer's journey, the personas and influencers, decision makers that you're working with, concerns maybe that they've raised, or even maybe who you're competing with. And of course, the exit criteria that you're managing for each influencer and decision maker. Those would be the things they need to see, hear, feel, understand, and believe in the current stage to feel comfortable moving forward. So most likely, Jason, to your point about the dumping, right? I think you want to share things progressively, more like in drips as they move through their buying process, as opposed to just dumping these buckets of content on them.
Drips, not dumps. Okay. So Doug, you provided an example of one of these microsites for us as we were preparing for this, for all of us to look at. How would one go about determining what content to put on the site?
I think Mike just nailed some of the considerations. You want to be conscious that what you're putting out there is relevant for where the buyer is in the buyer journey. And just thinking about the way we've used it for our own business. We like to have a few items out there right at the beginning. Mike's point about third-party content is a good one. Just finding some other people saying the things that can be helpful to the buyer, just because there's a credibility boost to that. But also, our marketing department puts out some good content that's value added that helps buyers think through some of the decisions of whatever they're purchasing. So we put some of that out there too, some guides, some ways of thinking about things. And then certainly early on, I like to put an intro video for anybody involved from our side in the deal, so that we can actually have a warm conversation when we actually get to them personally, and they know a little bit about us. So that's a good one early stage. And then after that first meeting, we like to include call recordings are an obvious one, especially if there are people who couldn't make that meeting from the client side, having that call recording out there. And one of my favorite things to do is find a couple points from that conversation you just had front stage with a client or with a prospect, and identify some additional content you can give them around an area of discussion that really hit home for them. So, if there was something that really resonated with them, or an idea that they said, well, we haven't thought enough about that yet, and you have content either from your own company or third party, that's a great thing to put out there and just mention it to them that, hey, we talked about this, so I thought you'd find this piece of content helpful. And then it just, let it organically go as you move through the buying process with the customer or the prospect. Let them self-serve and find the things that they need out there, and make sure that you're putting just the right amount of the right information in front of them when they need it. You don't want to bombard them, and you also don't want it to be an off-the-shelf copy and paste job for everybody. There are some things that probably are appropriate for most of your buyers, but you want it to be a little bit more custom than that and a little bit more dynamic to that. Because if it was just everything you could say about your products and all the content you could offer them, that's probably your company's webpage. And you're trying to do something that's a little bit more tailored and custom here.
We have spent the bulk of this series examining the nuances of virtual selling, and yet there is a myth going around that virtual selling doesn't require new skills. Sounds to me like it's time for debunked. Doug.
Yes, sir.
How about you take a crack at this myth? Virtual selling doesn't require new skills. Debunk, sir.
That's a tricky one, Jason, because in some cases, I would say that the virtual selling has exposed areas where skill sets were poor anyway. So on one hand, it's very important to make sure that salespeople are mastering the skills that already mattered, but are now more exposed in the land of virtual. But it's also important to be able to blend the use of technology to amp up and be very intentional about communication on live calls and things like that. And some of those things are just more important than they ever were. And using technology and using more of a buying process strategy on behalf of the buyer to support them. And some of that is new skill, in part because the way people have been selling for the longest amount of time didn't account for some of those things as well as they could have. And there was benefit of the doubt, and there was enough success happening just the way it was being done because of those in-person relationships and some of the glad handing and those things that are more traditional. So I would say that mastering technology is a skill, and I think that's something that does matter. But I also think there are some traditional selling skills that are even a higher threshold that sellers need to meet to be able to excel in this environment.
Well, I would say that we definitely all believe that virtual selling requires new skills. Otherwise, we wouldn't be creating an educational web series about it.
There you go.
So I think it's clear that virtual selling does require new skills. So let's declare this myth debunked. Mark, one way to get good at virtual selling and take advantage of the tools available has to do with what you call the power of personalization. Can you tell us about that?
I'll give you an example from the financial services industry. One of our clients started creating personalized welcome videos, and these were videos being sent to financial advisors, and the financial advisors offered this company's products to their end user clients. And in the past, they had sent just an email to introduce themselves. And now what they did is recorded a short form video, about 60 seconds, simply introducing themselves. They had one or two slides behind them to be able to communicate some further information. And then it ended with their contact information and a link, for example, to their Calendly or their calendar invite software. And what they found was that in one of the samples of 700 that went out, 211 were opened. And this veteran salesperson said, in my entire 25 years, I've never had a 30% open rate for any email. On average, I'm 1 to 2% on emails for anything that's cold. This was 30%. Beyond that, what this person said is that among the 211 that opened it, 38 of them watched 100% of that video. And you could make a case that in the post-pandemic world, that attention is the new coin of the realm. It's the currency that really matters. So when someone watches 100% of your 2-minute video, it's actually in and of itself a buying signal. So what this great seller did was he said, I started my follow-up with the 38 people who watched the entire thing before I went to the remainder of the 211. That's an example of where the art and the science of all of this process comes together.
And one thing that we know about DSRs is that they do provide a lot of data. So Mark, can you tell us, how does having the right data at the right time really help a sales rep?
Well, it helps in so many different ways. I mean, first and foremost, if someone has read what you have sent, it will make your call, in many cases, much more effective and more efficient. On the flip side of the coin, if they haven't read any of what I'll call the pre-work, then you're likely going to have to start in a very different place than if they did read it. So that's just at the very highest level of whether or not someone has absorbed the content themselves. But what if I could also tell you whether that content has been forwarded? What if one piece of content has been clicked on 10 times and you can see it's been clicked in 10 different cities, and the buying committee is in all these different cities? Now you get a sense of when one piece of content goes viral. The part of this that's so interesting is that we have sales organizations now where the CMO is part of this platform. And so the CMO is also using that data to say, my marketing team has created 10 documents or 10 tools for use by the sellers. And what we found is only 2 of those are really, quote, in the bloodstream. People are watching them, forwarding. They really seem to like them. These other 8, for whatever reason, are dying on the vine. So what they're saying is, based on this incremental data, we're focused on how do we create more like the 2 that are working and less like the 8 that aren't. This kind of iterative process is really what sets the best sales and marketing organizations apart from ones that don't communicate much.
Excellent. Does anybody want to add to what Mark just talked about?
Well, there's a perfect tie between that and buyer and customer acumen, really understanding the typical buyer personas and eventually the real buyers who are going through this journey with you. Because if you understand their process and you understand their decision criteria, and especially for each individual decision maker, their buying process exit criteria, or the things they need to see, hear, feel, understand, or believe in any given stage to move forward to the next stage, you can begin to develop your buyer engagement content to satisfy that exit criteria. And by then testing it in these rooms, like Mark just talked about, you can figure out what's hitting home, what's not, and then you can start to make adjustments to that content.
David, why don't you chime in on this? What is the value of this sort of analytics to not just a sales rep, but also to the company as a whole?
Yeah, one of the great sales accelerator effects of DSRs is that they allow the seller to be able to understand, first of all, is the entire buying committee involved in the decision? Are they engaging with the right resources? Are they inviting in new buying committee members that maybe we weren't aware of before? How are they engaging with different resources? Which resources do they find most valuable? All of these insights that we can get from DSR analytics help our sellers to be able to pull in new specialists, for example, on their side to support different buyer personas. They enable us to understand when the buying process is picking up or slowing down or stalling. All of these insights are extremely important in terms of helping to really support an effective buying process. And you can't get those types of insights if you can't track the activities of the buyers on the other side. So I'm a big fan of DSRs. I would say, however, that with great power also comes great responsibility. It's important for sellers not to jump on every interaction that gets tracked in DSR and start harassing the buyer or engaging with the buyer prematurely. I think it's very important to understand, if we want to be able to track these things, we have to behave responsibly and really only engage with buyers when it's something they would want, not something that we want.
Right. Mike, thoughts on the analytics that we receive from these microsites?
I think by being able to see how your assets, your videos, your shared documents, other content perform, that actually allows the sales rep to use the feedback to improve, right? So if a particular video was really successful, they can look at what they did and try to replicate that in other videos, maybe even with other clients. Or if a shared article or a case study, isn't being viewed, that might be a sign to try fresh content, work harder to ensure that what they're sharing is relevant for the buyers in that moment, or whether they may need to just rename the file more appropriately to inspire people to explore it. A lot of great things can come out of taking a look at that data and then trying to use it to learn how to work with this buyer and other buyers even more effectively. That's right. Yeah, I think, if you see that most people are watching only 5% of your video, then hey, maybe that's something to think about. So any other best practices, backstage best practices, Mark, that are on the top of your mind?
Yeah, just a couple other things. If I can go back to the Ben Zander example, it's not self-evident to everybody that after a concert, there's, quote, a backstage pass, right? And so you might be thinking, well, I understand in a concert what happens backstage after the concert is over, but is that applicable in the context of selling? And it turns out that all of those follow-up items are really what set the best ones apart. Being able to send a hyperlink to a piece of content, like we've talked about with a DSR, being able to send a summary in your email, the thank you note, even being able to pull in one of the subject matter experts who couldn't be part of the meeting and have them record a short message. All of these things are part of what makes this entire micro buying experience unique. It makes it memorable. And when it comes right down to it, if it's between two parties or two sellers and they're both pretty much equal, very often the quality of the experience that you create, which is really about how people feel after they interact with you, that can be, in some cases, the final differentiator, which causes the business to go to you versus someone else.
Another analogy that we can use is the world of sports, or a football game, for example. We know that the game itself is what is won or lost, but we have to really understand is that in a football game, there's all kinds of pre-game planning that goes on, understanding and strategizing about the other team and how you're going to take advantage of their weaknesses or exploit your own strengths. Or after the game, what do we do to review the tape, to review the footage, to see where the breakdowns were, where we could have done something different that would have led to a different outcome. We may have strength and conditioning programs. We may have position coaching programs. All of these different activities, while they're not part of the main game, they are the little things that on a daily basis add up to big outcomes. And fundamentally, once we understand selling as being like a sport, we understand the importance of the things that are going on outside the game, off the front stage and the backstage, as we call it. So I like the analogy of sports because in sports, unlike a lot of other professions, including selling, there's a lot of investment made in all of these other activities before and after the big event. And so I think if we start to think of sales teams as having similar challenges, we're going to give the proper consideration and investment in pre-game and post-game, what we would call backstage activities that lead to great performances on the big stage.
All right, a lot of great information on backstage best practices. And now, as always, let's hear from Jeanette with some advice on the technical elements. Jeanette, let's talk tech.
I'm Jeanette with Sparks IQ. When we were all in the office, we had lots of support around us. It kind of seemed like stuff just worked. And when it didn't, IT was just a call away. But now many remote workers need to be able to take care of business by themselves. That means we need to learn about our computers and the internet, which can feel really overwhelming. So I'm going to break down some tech tips that can make virtual life a bit smoother for you. Let's start with the internet. Video conferencing tools need a lot of it. But if you're sharing your Wi-Fi with your kids who just can't stop playing Fortnite or streaming Netflix, your internet signal can feel like dial-up. The problem is your competitors are going high speed. To keep from getting left in the dust, here's what you need to do. Run an internet speed test. There are lots of free ones online. It will tell you your download speed and your upload speed. Your provider might not be giving you what you're paying for, or maybe it's just time for an upgrade. Give them a call and see if a new router or modem would help. If your router and modem are relatively new, they'll likely recommend unplugging them every month or two to speed things up. Your modem connects your house to the internet. A router helps all of your devices connect. If you're close enough to your modem, you can get faster, more reliable internet by plugging your computer directly into the modem with an Ethernet cable. If you're not able to connect directly to your modem, the next best thing is to boost your Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi boosters can fill in dead zones around your home. Dead zones are places where the Wi-Fi signal drops or isn't strong enough. Even if you're not in a dead zone, maybe your Wi-Fi could just be a bit better. A booster or Wi-Fi network extender can also make a strong signal stronger. If you're not at home, reliable internet will be hard to control. One option, if you're on the go, is to use your phone as a hotspot. First, make sure your phone hotspot is on. Then connect your computer to your phone's hotspot the same way you connect to Wi-Fi. Hotspots can also be a great backup plan if your internet goes out at home. If you're still having a hard time using video conferencing tools, maybe it's time for a new computer. Computers evolve so quickly that after a few years, it's a good idea to invest in a new one with better RAM and faster processing, so you can spend more time thinking about work and less time worrying about tech.
Thanks, Jeanette, for some great advice on hardware, software, the internet, and zombies. This has been a terrific episode on Backstage Best Practices. Remember, everybody, that Backstage encompasses all the asynchronous interactions along the buyer journey. And if you follow the best practices we've been talking about, you should be able to create an exceptional buying experience. Before we end the series, and this is the end of the series, guys, is there one last piece of advice that you want to share as our viewers embark on becoming exceptional virtual sellers? Mike, start with you.
It's a process. You're learning a lot of new things, a lot of new perspectives, new skills, technologies. Be a little kind to yourself, demand excellence, but know that it's a journey. If you continue down this journey and you commit yourself to excellence, you're going to be a completely different and more effective seller in the course of this next year.
Wonderful. David, any last bit of advice that you can share with the virtual sellers out there?
I often say we're only as good as our best habits. Until we commit to this as a journey and learn the daily habits of front stage selling, backstage selling, and the key idea of orchestration, until those become habits, we won't truly master them and we won't truly be serving the marketplace.
And how about you, Doug? One final piece of advice for the budding virtual sellers out there?
I think just thinking about how you can help buyers buy versus how you sell to them, having that mind frame is very helpful, and use the technology, use these techniques to make sure that you're able to do that successfully.
Mark, you get the last word on virtual selling, my friend. What are your final thoughts?
Jason, there's 3 types of people in this world: those who make things happen, those who watch them happen, and those who wonder what happened. Which type will you be?
I want to make things happen. That's the type that I want to be. And I think our viewers want to be that as well. Otherwise, they would have stopped watching a few episodes ago. Thanks again to Mark Magnaca, David Batters, Mike Kunkel, and Doug Wyatt for providing so much valuable insight throughout the series. Before we go, let's celebrate the lack of excellence in virtual communication that makes everything we're doing here so valuable.
One who wants during COVID-19.
Warm up, it's going to take...
Pardon me. My apologies.
This. Why, and apologize for my cats here. Why are you...
Dr. Tato, my bad.
Are my eyes this close together normally?
Have good regimens to keep the data to make sure that, I'm sorry, the bird just landed on his head.
Government level, and in that case, do we say, well, Leicester's been useful?
I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
And that's it for virtual selling. And now we want you to get out there. Stay in there and virtually sell your hearts out. And if you want to learn more about how you can become an excellent seller, visit sparksiq.com. Happy virtual selling, everybody. Goodbye.